Hello and welcome to the second year of Logic, Logic 2, otherwise known as Advanced Formal Logic. This will be a continuation of our study in first year logic of traditional logic. Now we're going to move into things that, as you can tell from the name of the course, are a bit more advanced. We're going to begin just by doing a little bit of review. That's talking about valid syllogisms. You might remember from Logic 1 that this occupied the last 2 or 3 months especially of our study, determining what made syllogisms valid. We learned about the 7 rules for categorical syllogisms. That was one tool to determine if a syllogism is valid. We're going to revisit that at the end of this presentation. In this course, we're going to begin by talking about the tools of figure and mood in a syllogism. The figure of a syllogism, it's the disposition or location of the terms in the premises. Another way to think of it is it's the shape that the syllogism takes. And when we talk about the shape of the syllogism, we are especially concerned with where is the middle term? Where do we find the middle term in the syllogism? That's going to tell us the kind of figure that the syllogism has. And just again to review, a syllogism is just a group of propositions in an orderly sequence, one of which, the consequent, is said to be necessarily inferred from the others, the antecedent. The example we keep coming back to, the traditional syllogism, is all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. You might recall that a syllogism will always contain 2 premises and a conclusion. You might also remember every syllogism has 3 terms. We have a major term. The major term is going to be the predicate in the conclusion. The minor term, which is the subject of the conclusion, and the middle term. This is the term that appears in both premises, but it does not appear in the conclusion. It's the term that helps me link the major and the minor term. So in the example we had before, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. We can see that mortal is my major term because it is the predicate of the conclusion. You might also recall we often mark this with a P to show the major term. So you see mortal is my major term. I'll just mark it both times it occurs. Socrates is the minor term, which we're going to mark with S. We're going to mark it in both places it occurs. And this makes men my middle term. We can see that men is the term that's connecting mortal and Socrates. Let's do another one. All mammals are warm-blooded. Dogs are mammals, therefore dogs are warm-blooded. The major term is warm-blooded. The minor term is dogs, and the middle term is mammals. Again, the term mammals is connecting my major and minor terms. How about this one? All fractions are real numbers. 0.3 repeating can be written as a fraction, therefore 0.3 repeating is a real number. You can see that real number, that is my major term. Here we're using the mathematical abbreviation that uppercase Q. 0.3 repeating is my minor term, which means fraction or fractions is my middle term. All of these we often abbreviate just by saying all M is P, all S is M, therefore all S is P. Again, the location of M tells me what figure the syllogism is. The one we're looking at here is a great example of a first figure syllogism. The middle term is the subject of the major premise and the predicate of the minor premise. We call these sub-pri. This is an abbreviation for the Latin term subjectum, or subject, and praedicatum, which means predicate. So we see the middle term first in the subject, then in the predicate. That is a first figure. So again, all human beings are mortal. All boys are human beings, therefore all boys are mortal. A good example of a first figure syllogism. Mortal, of course, is my major term. Boys would be the minor term. And human beings is now the middle term. First it appears as a subject, then it appears as a predicate. This is a sub-pri. It is first figure or a sub-pri syllogism. For next time, for Monday, you should read the first 4 pages in the book just to know what's coming up. And you should carefully read pages 1 and 2, and then you should do the exercises for day 1 in Moodle. You should also take time to write down the 7 rules for categorical syllogisms. These are not in your book, but they are going to show up on your first test. You'll have to write them or type them out. So you should write them out now. The terminological rules: first, there must be 3 and only 3 terms. If a syllogism has more than 3 terms or fewer than 3, that's a clue to us that this is not a valid syllogism. The middle term must not appear in the conclusion. If the middle term is there, it is not a valid syllogism. The quantitative rules: if a term is distributed in the conclusion, then it must be distributed in the premises. And then number 4, the middle term must be distributed at least once. If you need time to write those down, you can pause the video right now and do that. I'm going to move on to the next 2 rules. So there are the quantitative rules again. And let's do the qualitative rules. First, or number 5, no conclusion can follow from 2 negative premises. Number 6, if the 2 premises are affirmative, the conclusion must also be affirmative. And finally, number 7, if either premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. And a syllogism must comply with all the rules to be considered valid. Again, if you need to pause the video, you can do that now to write down the last 3 of the rules there. But you will need to know all 7 for the test. Let's have a look at your homework just as a reminder about how the homework should be done. So if you're doing this on Moodle, you're going to want to type this out, not write it. But you're going to have your name. It's Logic 2. This is Chapter 1 homework for Day 1. And you're going to put the date. So look on page 5. We'll do some of these together just as a reminder about how the homework should be done. First question asks, what are we discussing in this chapter? As a rule, it is a good idea to use complete sentences. So we cannot just write figures or syllogisms. We should write something like the use of figure in syllogisms. Then number 2, explain what the word figure means as used in this chapter. Again, I would use a complete sentence for this. I would say something like, the figure of a syllogism is the disposition or location of terms in the premises. Number 3 asks, how many figures are there? And you could put 4 for this. I would probably write there are 4 figures. And then numbers 4 and 5, you can work on these on your own. Why don't you have a look at those first 9 questions, the exercises for day 1. Again, if they're in Moodle, you can do them in Moodle instead, but make sure that your answers are understandable, that they're complete. Okay.